Because if you have a tenant in that property who is consistently having parties and consistently bringing people over, and then you have a lot of turnover. And so in order to do that, that tenant selection process is really important. And part of that process, I always say, is sitting down with them and saying, here's just like you would have an HOA community guideline.
House rules. Alrighty, folks, it is continuing to be an interesting time to produce cash flow in real estate, high prices with high rates. I think there's actually a growing theme that a lot of people are going after, and it's called rent by room. You may have heard of a company called Pad Split. Rent by room has been a thing for a while. It's a version of house hacking. But I want to know, because I do think rent by room is going to take off, kind of little mini suites, if Hemlane can or might be adapted to support this growing investment theme of rent by the room. And of course, we have the CEO of Hemlane, Dana Dunford. How you doing, Dana?
Great. Thanks so much, Michael, for having me on the show.
Absolutely. So I think we've got to talk. Obviously, we've talked about Hemlane being the platform for mom and pop landlords. We have talked about how Hemlane is the platform for out-of-state investors. But now we have to have a meaningful conversation about a growing trend, rent by the room. I actually think this is about to get white hot. Think Airbnb 2021, 2022, short-term rentals, mid-term rentals. I think rent by the room is going to get that hot because you can produce pretty meaningful cash flows. But does Hemlane work for rent?
Yeah. So I love that question. And before I even get to, so the short answer is yes, Hemlane works for rent by room. And I'll give you the transformation over time on the tech side that has made it where Hemlane has been able to justify going into rent by room. But before I get into that, I do want to give some sort of background on rent by room and what I've been seeing in the trends with it, and then where the future is with it. So the first thing is that affordability, we can all agree, is a huge problem in the US, and especially with interest rates where they are. And so more people renting for longer, and then new tenants coming into the market who may be single being like, prices are so high for rentals. It is a fantastic way to solve the affordability gap. And actually, I think of it very similar to Airbnb. I mean, Airbnb, but in actually a more positive way, because it's someone's home, and it's not taking housing supply off the market. It's putting more housing supply on. The big thing was saying, hey, usually when you rent a place, you have 2 or 3 vacant rooms. What if you could just increase the supply by taking those rooms and suddenly making it where they are also on that long-term inventory for renters to rent? And what I love about Pad Split and what Atticus did there was they were one of the first ones to do it. And they used a lot of the Airbnb model of really quickly, you don't even have to tour the place. Nobody tours the place in the Pad Split model. You go right in, you go ahead and sign, and it's just weekly. You pay weekly for it. But a tenant has to know to go on Pad Split. And if you talk to any tenant out there, most of them are on Zillow or one of the traditional websites looking for a place. And so they don't discover the rent by room unless they've heard about it. There's some other companies. There's one I am an advisor for, used to advise for Home Room, and they got acquired by Bungalow, that also does rent by room, but they do full stack management, which is a huge caveat that I want to talk about in this video, because rent by room I think is phenomenal, but you also have to know what you're getting into.
Amen. I'm so glad you went there. Yes, keep going.
So I've seen it just from doing advising with them. There are certain things that they have to tackle that when we said, great, we're also offering rent by room, you can easily do it on Hemlane, but there's some caveats of things that will take more time for you versus if you're long-term joint lease, super easy, more straightforward. And so that was the growing trend with, these kind of companies that are siloed, not on Zillow and stuff, offering this solution. Now, the biggest change that has been made is Zillow now offers a rent by room check the box on their website. And
Wow.
so we syndicate to Zillow, and that's where most of these rent by room tenants come from. We syndicate to them, and if you're a tenant, you can discover that and be like, oh, rent by room, yeah, the prices are really expensive, maybe I should look into that. And so it's a way to grow the market faster, and I think you need one of the big guys to help you grow the market faster in
Oh,
order
amen.
to do that. Wherever the renters are looking, Zillow's rental team, their North Star metric is tenants on platform. It's not owners on platform. Their North Star metric is tenants on platform.
Interesting.
So you can imagine with that being their North Star, which I think is ingenious for that to be their North Star metric, more renters are going to that platform than anywhere else. And so that discovery comes through searching and being like, geez, a one bedroom in my area is, $1,500 a month. But look, I could rent a room for $800 in a nicer place. So I do think that it is a trend that will continue, and you can make a lot more and increase your revenue and like your rental rates by renting by room. Here are the caveats with it. First, you have to look at your property and what is your property even able to do rent by room. So for example, I spoke with someone at the One Rental at a Time event, and I thought he brought up such a great point. He said, I only do corner lots because there's more parking. He said, I've got parking on both sides. And I said, you know what, actually, that makes a ton of sense.
Genius.
And so I think there's little things like that you need to write down, because if you're in an area where maybe you're like, oh, I want to do rent by room, but there's not a lot of parking, the neighbors are going to be like, what is going on with 3 or 4 people going in and out of this place? So you need to know your market and know whether or not your property can do rent by room. The next thing on the management side for you to worry about is communal space. Hemlane has it set up, and what makes it really cool is you're just paying that, $2.50 per unit versus PadSplit and the other softwares will take a percentage fee of the rent coming in. So it can get expensive. Yours is just this flat rate if you're using the software only, or even if you're using our repair coordination, where it's just a flat rate per each one. And so it makes it much more affordable, and you would have them as non-joint leases. So you could still have that property, but you'd have 3 or 4 units in it, and the unit is each door.
Right.
And that way they're not jointly responsible. The thing that you have to worry about is one, communal area. You most likely are going to have to furnish that yourself.
Yep.
And I've seen in some of these situations, requests come in, the garbage disposal is broken. Okay, we found a bottle cap down the garbage disposal. In the case of a non-rent by room, it's very easy to say, Michael, you're my tenant. It's you and your wife. I don't care who put the bottle cap down, but you're responsible for paying. They can't argue with me.
Yep.
But if you have 5 rooms, they're going to be like, nope, Tiffany did that. Nope, it was Joe. It was Joe who did that. And suddenly there's a he said, she said. And so there's some additional cost associated with that communal area that you just need to factor into it. Other things that you need to factor in is utilities. And so suddenly you're not going to have sub-metered billing per room. And so when you put together your listing, you're going to have to put together, here's the utilities per room. Here's the internet per room. You're setting it up much more like a short-term rental than a long-term rental. And so we give that caveat because we say you just need to be aware that there's slightly more of this work. You can do the utilities and charge them in the system. You can charge the rent in the system and all of that. You can put the internet passcodes in the system, but you just need to set that up versus single family homes, one rental at a time, long-term joint tenants. You're like, great, here are the keys. You set up the utilities, you set up the internet, you do the landscaping. It all goes to the tenant. And so it's just something to make sure that when you're going through it, you're also saying, what's the increase in rent? And what's the additional time that would have to go into getting things set up to make this a rent by room?
Yeah, the other thing I would highlight, because again, I have a buddy in Vegas who did rent by the room for probably the last 3 or 4 years and was relatively successful. But recently he's actually left the business. And the reason he left the business is he just had more and more kind of tenant quality issues. He actually had multiple tenants literally light the unit on fire. I mean, can you imagine?
Wow.
Somebody, being that distraught, lighting their bedroom on fire, and obviously takes potentially the entire house with them. So the one thing I would say there that I think my buddy did wrong is tenant selection is even more important,
Yes.
not less important.
Yep.
In a rent by the room situation. And, at the end of the day, the more people you involve in your real estate, the more management intensive it is. It's not, when you're renting out 3, 5, 7 bedrooms to, 7 different people, it's more headaches, not less. I mean, it reminds me of going from, owning a bunch of 4-bedroom homes to owning one 5-unit building, all, small 1-bedrooms. The management headache went through the roof and I wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
I can only imagine. The thing I do think rent by the room is going to take off. I think it's going to be this year's short-term rental. Everybody's going to chase the money. But folks, you got to realize management is more important, not less. And the fact that Hemlane is going to provide that layer between you and the tenant is helpful. And, that's, you got to realize you're in the service business.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I love your point on one tenant can completely ruin that cash flow. Because if you have a tenant in that property who is consistently having parties and consistently bringing people over, and then you have a lot of turnover. And so in order to do that, that tenant selection process is really important. And part of that process, I always say, is sitting down with them and saying, here's just like you would have an HOA community guideline, you have house rules. And you just say, here are the rules. And if you break these rules, you're out and you lose your deposit too. Can you confirm that? And by having even stricter rules about that, of friends over, how long friends can stay, all of these house rules that they have to sign, you will have people opt out of your rent by room and go to a less professional rent by room.
Yes.
And that's going to become their problem. Yeah. Okay. And then one other thing that I've noticed with rent by room in looking at the ones on Hemlane, the ones where they don't furnish the bedroom, but they furnish the living space, actually tend to have the tenants stay for longer. Because the tenants are committed to like bringing in their own bed, making their own room, almost like a long-term rental.
Yeah.
Even though the communal space, you're designing that and putting the furniture in. But I thought that was a really interesting insight, because there's some who do rent by room who like provide the bed, provide the desk, and it's very cookie cutter. But then a lot of people think of it as more short-term, 30-day, 60-day. And so that's just something interesting. I would A/B test if you are doing rent by room to look at and say, hey, should I not be furnishing the rooms and have them make it feel like their home? They furnished it, because they're less likely to move.
I'm curious, when you look at the Hemlane platform today, I'm just going to wild ass guess this. I'm going to guess if you go available units, you're probably less than 2% today, rent by room versus.
Oh yeah. It's such a small percentage, but it's the one that it's the most popular question that we're getting. I spoke with someone last night who is trying to sell a place, and it's, I think, a nine bedroom house, and she's having a really difficult time selling it. And then her question was, great, I'm going to take it off market and put it in rent by room. And so it is growing. It also is one of those things where I think 9 bedrooms is slightly more challenging. You're going to have a lot more drama. And also, I think the sale of a 9-bedroom is much more challenging.
Have you met people? Can you imagine?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So where I was going with my question is, I think you're less than 2% today, might even be less than 1% today, but I'd put $100 on the fact that you're over 5% by the end of the year. I think it's going to be that kind of a hot hockey stick.
Yeah.
Because cash flow, if you go in with eyes wide open, which is what I always recommend, it can be a money printing business.
Yeah.
But it is very much a services business. This is not your long-term rental where you hear from them once a year. This is active management. But I think it's going to take off.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think it will take off, and it will also help with affordability, because I don't see why. I mean, I kind of did a rent by room right out of college as well. There was no need when I was single and out of college to, I lived with roommates. We created our own rent by room type situation. But if I had moved to a new place, or even with our current roommates, one moves out, you need another one. I think it's a great way to teach folks to save so they can one day buy a home or one day buy a rental property with rent by room.
There you go. Well, this has been a great conversation. I love the fact that Hemlane supports Rent by Room. Again, I think it'll be a growing investment option for folks. Where can people find out more about Hemlane?
Yeah, you can go to www.hemlane.com and just mention one rental at a time, because you do get our highest discount of 20% off your first year. We also have free packages. So even if you just want to list your property and try it out, that's totally free.
Free. How much is free? Free is free. There you go.
Yes.